Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jonah, and today we have Eric Kennedy with us. And before we get started or I do any introductions real quick, I just would love if you can pop in the comments, let us know if you can hear us, see us, everything is working on your end. Also, feel free to call out where you're tuning in from. We love to hear where people are tuning in from all over the world, maybe something you're excited to learn. Eric has done an event before, so if you've seen one of his other events, call that out. We love to see returning viewers. Just give those comments a second to pop in. Eric, if you could give just a little wave and a hello so we can confirm that you're visible and audible.
Hey there.
Awesome.
If you can hear me, let me know.
Can hear you great. Couple other things before we get going. If Eric is moving fast today or anything gets lost or you need to step away from the computer for a second, don't fret. Replay of this will be emailed to you along with the course offers and any other resources that Eric provides during this event. So take your time. There's no fret over time. All of that will be available after. To give a proper introduction, because it looks like we are visible and audible to everyone, today we have Eric Kennedy. He's going to be teaching us the non-designer's guide to designing beautiful UI. A couple things we can expect to learn today: how to pick great fonts and style them well, work with colors in interfaces, make your own designs neat, clean, and modern using spacing, alignment, and other fundamental design strategies. Little background on Eric. Eric Kennedy is an independent UX and UI designer in beautiful Seattle, Washington. He has spoken here and abroad at businesses, meetups, and universities like UC Berkeley and Yale. And in addition, his writing has been read by over 1 million people. His clients have ranged from startups to Fortune 100 and have included companies like Soylent, Amazon, Rome Research, and more. Now, Eric, I don't want to take all the time today, so I'm going to hand it over to you and let you take it away.
Thanks, Jonah. Yeah, so welcome, everyone. What I'm going to do is give a little presentation in Figma. Figma is a design app. If you've never used it, it's fantastic. It's like probably the most popular UI design app out there right now. And I'm going to take a submission from one of my newsletter readers and redesign it. And we're going to be talking about some of the principles and kind of design tactics that I would use in any normal client project, but apply it to a one-page design and try and do this in a very abbreviated fashion. So there's a lot of stuff that we're going to be rushing through. And because of that, if you have any questions, just pop them into the chat at any point. And if I notice a question or Jonah says, hey, there's a question, I'll try and pause and address that. So at least even if we don't get through all the details of how to design a complicated page, we can still answer some of your questions specifically, and you'll see a handful of the other tips and tactics and tricks that I use.
Cheers. And Eric, not to interrupt, but I did forget to mention, we will have a formal Q&A session at the end. So if we don't get to your question during the presentation, we'll do our best at the very end to get there. And Eric, I will be dropping that Figma link into the comments for anyone that wants to follow along. Yes?
Yeah, perfect.
Cheers.
All right. So yeah, I'm going to
you.
switch on over to a different screen here. And if you guys can see the Figma screen, it's it's a user interface. It says Century Health at the top left. And yeah, we should be good to go. It looks like that's actually working fine. Fantastic. All right. So this is a submission from one of my readers named Michael. And he said, I've designed this patient health dashboard. And all in all, it looks pretty good. It's not like just obviously awful, and there's so many little things we need to fix. So what we want to do is try and take it to the next level. And I'm going to talk about some design strategies for that, where let's take something that, again, it already looks pretty modern, pretty neat and clean. And then how do we just make it look even better than that? So first thing I'm going to do is, pardon me, I've got a little bit of a lingering cough here. Oh, the first thing I'm going to do is realize my Bluetooth keyboard's not working. So I'm going to press A and create a new frame where we're going to be doing all the new design work. And actually, one other thing I'll do is, just for posterity's sake, we'll keep an original example here, and then I'll start modifying this one a little bit. So One of the things with designing a dashboard is a dashboard, almost by definition, has so much information on it, more information than almost any other kind of design you're going to be working on. And these are also super practical to understand how to design as, say, a freelance designer or even a full-time designer somewhere, because just an outsized proportion of the businesses that want to hire designers have things like dashboards or data heavy like tables or screens like that. It's just something that as a designer, if you're going to get good at UI design, you have to understand how to do this. So when I'm designing a dashboard, one thing I think about is 3 questions actually that I ask myself is, what can I remove? What can I hide? And what can I sort of lighten or make less visibly obvious or less visibly apparent? So with those 3 things, I can treat a whole bunch of the elements on this page, and it's going to go a long ways towards making it cleaner. So we're just going to kind of do a little bit of that at the beginning. It's actually going to make, to some degree, it's going to make things a little bit messier before it gets better, but you'll kind of see how this works. So one thing I might do is delete something like this welcome message, which doesn't really serve a practical purpose in the dashboard. Like if we want to add it in later, we can always go and do that. But for right now, it's really big, it's really bold, it's at the top, and it's not providing a proportionate amount of value for users. This make an appointment button is kind of in a weird place. And actually, my first inclination would be that we should put it where the appointments are actually listed. And this is something I talk about in my user experience course called Learn UX Design, called the Law of Locality. Then we also have this little sentence saying when your last appointment was and that there's no upcoming appointments. But I also feel like this is sort of not super, super important because that should be pretty obvious if they look at appointments or recent visits to see when their last one is and if they have any upcoming. So I'm going to remove that as well. And that lets us remove this entire box at the top. Now, we are now at a point where all of this information, we could like slide it way on up here towards the top. But this looks a bit odd. And so actually what I want to do is work on this sidebar for just a minute. Pardon me again. So with this sidebar, you'll notice that it's like the most colorful element on the screen, right? Like, yeah, there's this button and maybe there's a few hundred pixels of yellow color right here. But this sidebar is like at least as wide as the button, and then it's whatever, dozens of times taller. So if you kind of squint and you just ask yourself, what attracts my attention the most on this page? The answer is the sidebar. It's huge and it's colorful. But if you squint and you kind of are just trying to perceive the page at a very like high level, you should always perceive the most important element first. Whatever you squint and see first, that should be the most important thing that you want to draw users' eyes towards. And the sidebar doesn't really meet those criteria or that criterion. So what I want to do is make this sidebar a little bit less noticeable. So one way to do that is, actually this is maybe a bit incidental, but I'm going to have it go all the way from top to bottom. And then instead of it being this blue, this kind of dark, rich blue color, I'm actually just going to grab this light gray right here, which unfortunately makes all this stuff invisible just for a second. But actually, I can grab all these things, and then I'm just going to quickly try and recolor some of these sidebar items so that we can see them, and then we'll keep moving on to other stuff.
So, Eric, I want to pop in quick just to like confirm your kind of methodology here. It seems like first and foremost, declutter take away anything we don't need. And then with all this coloring, your real goal is to just draw the eye to what's most important the minute like a user comes in. Is that kind of the theory here?
Exactly. So
cool. Love it.
Pardon me. Yeah, especially with something like a dashboard. Just the very first work I'm going to do, and if this was a client project, this would take the form of just like a very in-depth conversation where I basically point to every element on the page and say, do we really need this? Do we really need this? Do we really need this? And it's maybe a little bit silly, but I think sorry, one second. Try and give these presentations, and I do have some trouble talking and designing at the same time.
Oh, no worries.
I
I can't
All
walk and talk sometimes, so no harm there.
There we go. That is a little bit better of a situation. And then dashboard with the selected item here. So what I'm going to do is actually I'll put like whatever, let's say we'll make it 70 pixels tall, and this will be sort of the highlighted state around the item that is currently selected. So I'll just make it this kind of a blue color, and then these items right here, I will give them a much darker version of this same blue so that they stand out. Now, just because we're on the sidebar, I'll talk about a few other things related to the sidebar. One is that I have this idea that you should always have your icons sort of be about the same thick. Oops. I think I just created a new file. It's not what I want to do here. About the same thickness as the text, as the like letter forms in the text. And so I call that being drawn with the same pen. In other words, it should look like this icon is about the same thickness as this text right next to it. And you don't want the icons to pop that much more or that much less than the text. Overall, they kind of should like add, as if they're like another letter form. Technically, like an icon is a picture, but it's one that sort of feels like a letter form might. So I'm going to take each of these icons and I'm actually going to shrink them just a bit and make them a little bit more sized, similar to the text. And if this was a real client project, this might be a little bit more careful of a process. For right now, all I'm going to do is I'm just, taking the height field and reducing that. And as long as the aspect ratio is held the same, then it'll be great. Like it'll work just fine. And then here's the last one. Do the same thing. Okay. Now, one thing I want to be careful of is basically as the user moves their mouse down from one link to the next, there basically should be no quote unquote dead space where I'm not hovering over a link, which means that each of these pieces of text is essentially like they're just it's a series of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is that 6 or 7 contiguous links. So what I'm going to do is actually I can tell Figma to tidy up the spacing, and then I can reduce it wholesale and kind of get all of them at once. Something like that looks a lot better. And then I just need to adjust the icons so that they're that same distance apart. There we go, something like that. Then I might move them over. I'm going to reduce this blue a little bit and end up with a sidebar that overall is not like competing with the rest of the screen quite so much. All right, now I have these other things, which I'm going to move down just a bit. And at this point, I can continue going through and kind of deleting the things that I think are unnecessary. And that's just part of it. Like I said, there's 3 things I'm really doing. I'm saying, one, is there stuff that's totally unnecessary that I can remove? Is there stuff that is currently too important or looks too important or eye-catching that I can reduce the visual weight of? And then is there stuff that's so infrequently used that I can hide it behind a menu or hide it so that I only see it on hover or something else like that? So for instance, these medical icons, they're not really adding any practical purpose, but they do kind of add something to the design. So I'll keep them, but maybe I would just make them smaller, like say 30 pixels instead of 40. And I'm just kind of eyeballing them. There's not really a strong reason to do any specific value here. Now, these little percentage changes, to me, these are actually kind of confusing because, for instance, I don't know when it's an 8% decrease compared to. If I'm at 155 now, I don't know when I was 8% more. Doesn't say that. And then also, this is a fixable issue, but in this particular design that was submitted, like having my heart rate go up doesn't seem to be a green, like green equals good. It doesn't seem to be a good thing. Meanwhile, say, for instance, my weight going down, that probably shouldn't be red. So I'm actually just going to remove those rather than try and fret about them too much. Already that gets things looking a bit cleaner, but we will still come back and do a bit more with this. So with the appointments here, unless I have just an incredible number of appointments scheduled, I don't think I really need the ability to sort by specialist, which is what this implies. Likewise, same thing with date and time. And then the status, if this was a real client project, I'd want to understand what all the statuses were and which ones we need to display here. But if I have a canceled appointment, I feel like it's pretty much just should not be appearing here. So I would actually say this needs to be either upcoming or I'm just going to remove it. And the same thing with delayed. Like I would want to understand how the system works in full, but I could imagine instead showing only the ones that were actually happening. And then here we go. Let's see. Show maybe canceled or whatever it is. This would be a link so I could see appointments of other statuses. Cool. Moving on to prescriptions, I want the prescriptions and the appointments to actually be nicely aligned with one another. And then these cards will also be the same way. But one thing I'm going to do is in the same manner that we have like little titles right here, I'm actually going to show them above this column too, because I want it to I want basically everything to look as consistent as possible. In my user interface design course, I call this consistency first, just the idea that like the more things look consistent, where similar items are styled similarly, the more users will just sort of have this understanding that they are looking at similar types of things. And so likewise, if this is sort of a table of appointments and this is a table of prescriptions, I'm going to have the same consistent style of header on both of those. So this is really like, I don't know, let's say the medicine, and then this is the instructions. There might be medical terms that are better for this, but that's like an easy fix. All right, and then I have the same sort of thing with these visits recent visits right here. But you know what? I'm not actually sure we're going to have too much time to get to this table, so I'll leave it be for now. All right. So just doing, I mean, this isn't a before after. This is like a before and then partway through. But you can see we've already cleaned up things quite a bit and really at no loss of functionality. Just to review, a lot of what we've been saying to ourselves is what can we remove or what can we make a little bit less visible? And so already I think this is in a better state, but there's still going to be other things that we can fix. Also, can I get a time check? How much time do we have to continue with the presentation?
Absolutely. We've got at least 15, 20 more minutes, maybe more if you want.
All right, perfect.
Chilling. Yeah, I'll let you know if we're, yeah, keep plugging. I'll hop in if we're going overtime for you. Okay.
So now what I'm going to do is actually take this dashboard and I'm going to fix one of the most common beginner design mistakes that I see, which is most of these design apps, when you create a new artboard or a new frame to start working from, they're going to give you this perfectly white background, and you can see this everywhere. So if you accept that white background and then you go and decide that you're going to make a card, for instance, maybe a card where you're displaying some specialist's name or some details about an appointment, you often think, okay, I need a slightly different color here, and you reach for something that's really similar to white. And since white is the brightest color, the only thing you can do is use a very light gray. Unfortunately, there's this weird effect where any color that's darker appears to actually be more recessed into the screen. And so if you want something to pop and feel like it's popping out like a card would if it's overlaid on the background of the screen, you actually want to use instead the brightest white for the card and then a slightly darker gray for the background. So one thing I'm going to do right here is grab this medium background white color and let's see, just switch it to white. Okay, so it looks like that's hitting most of the cards. I might want to dive into these ones special. Switch the background color. But then on the entire frame, I'm going to go and change the fill color to, instead of be white, I'm going to move the brightness down a bit. And if you notice, this is the hue, saturation, brightness color system that I'm using. I don't have a ton of time to talk about that, but if anyone has questions, they can ask it in the Q&A. We can talk about why I use that color system rather than something like RGB. I'm also just going to put a little divider line between the sidebar and the main area, because now they're both these shades of gray. This one is they're both very, very bright gray. But one thing I want to do, and this is another very common beginner designer mistake, is I don't actually want the divider line to be this dark. Like if you look, that's actually it's ridiculously dark. And so this kind of goes to what we were talking about, where everything, like I want to look at every element, and that includes things like divider lines, and say what is too eye-catching relative to its importance. And this divider line, all it needs to do is sort of signal that there's a division of content between the left side and the right side. And it's a very simple job. And as long as it's subtle enough or visible enough that it kind of separates the content, it doesn't need to be any darker. So I just pressed 1 to make it 10% opacity. And that's actually plenty dark for something like this. You'll notice, by the way, that now all of these cards, oops, I mean to delete them. All of these cards now look a little bit more like true cards, where they're kind of a white background on a light gray, on a sort of a greater light gray background. And that's just going to feel a little bit more accurate, a little bit more realistic. And most of the cards in professionally designed apps that you see are going to follow this same format. Oh, hey, someone's in the Figma file. One thing I'm actually going to do, Figma is cool because you can see everyone else who's here. Looks like it's maybe only one other person right now. But I'm going to go ahead and turn off multiplayer cursors just so we don't have other people's cursors flying around here. Now, this one thing I want to talk about that's super important, apart from just kind of these like heuristics for how to simplify dashboard UI. So I want to talk a little bit about brand, because brand is very important if you're designing UI. Brand is the idea that you might have a series of adjectives that just represent how you want users to feel about your site or app. And they could range everything from, say, very friendly to professional to artsy to quirky to scientific or futuristic, etc. So when Michael submitted this design, one thing he mentioned is it should just have like a very simple professional brand. And honestly, with most client work today, that's the most common request that you're going to get, is people just want something that looks clean and simple and neat. And especially for something that's medical, it's gonna be like a pretty plain, simple brand. We're not really gonna do too much with it. It just needs to sort of convey professionalism and that it's modern and it's neat. So one of the big ways that you convey brand is with the choice of font that you have. And so I'm going to actually select everything on this whole frame, and I'm going to change the font. I'm going to change it from, it's currently in a font called Open Sans, to something that is like a little bit more just neat and clean feeling. Now, one of the resources, pardon me, one of the resources that I have in my Learn UI Design course for all students is a Figma document called the Good Fonts Table. And this is over 100 handpicked fonts that I've compiled, sans serif, serifs, slab serifs, and other. And this is a resource that all students have lifetime access to. And one thing I've done is, beyond just doing the normal classification of fonts, which you don't really need to worry about now, like things like grotesque or Gothic sans, I've went and found some of them that are, for instance, labeled or feel very clean and simple, as opposed to, say, ones that feel quirky and friendly, or ones that feel kind of techy or condensed. There's all sorts of different feelings that I've kind of identified. And this makes it easy to go pick whatever one you might want. So for instance, I just happen to know, and we can go into this in more detail, that I'm going to want a clean, simple font here, and I might pick one from this list. And Inter is actually a very popular new font that I'm going to use for this example. So I have everything selected. I think if I press plus, okay, now it just styled all text the exact same way. Whatever, we might just have to live with it. Yeah, so that fixed a lot of it, but some of the things that were in child elements of groups are still going to take a little bit more styling. So let's just swing through some of this stuff fairly quickly. One thing I'll do here is I'm going to left align all of this text. And then in the same way that I highlighted with color the active state here, I'm actually going to de-emphasize all the other non-active ones. And a great way to do that is just by setting the opacity lower. So now the icons are at 70% opacity, the text is at 80, and that actually feels pretty nice. If I have a logo in the same font, I might do something like give it the black weight, which is just the absolute thickest font weight. It's like even bolder than bold. I'll pump up the size a little bit. And just doing something like this will make it a little bit more distinguishable from the rest of the content on this page. Now what I can do, actually it's kind of funny, even though I lost all of this styling, it sort of helps in a way because now I can keep things very, very consistent. I can select all similar items at the same time. So what I'm doing here is just making sure that all the text is nice and aligned. Make sure that everything is also aligned left. And then I'm going to make these particular stats bigger. Say something like size 24. It looks like they lost the fact that they should be an inter. So I'll get that. For medical, these little subtitles here, those lost their styling as well, unfortunately. So I'll do, by default, I'm just going to try the same font size that I'm using here. And again, that's just what I call consistency first, just defaulting towards making things consistent and then only making them less consistent if there's a specific reason to do so. So these are all like little labels, right? These 6 things that I have selected here. And I'm actually going to go ahead with all the other labels that I have because like medicine, instructions, etc. These are basically the label for the column label below. So I'm going to style all of these things the same. I'm making them all inter and I'm actually a little bit smaller. Oops, no, first what I really want to do is make them all left. Then I'll make them smaller. I'm actually going to use a hotkey to make them all uppercase. And then I'm going to press 8 or 7 to make them a little bit lighter. And this combination of text styles, making it smaller and uppercase and lighter, is something that professional designers do to a great degree. And I this in Learn UI Design. It's a really handy go-to. I call it the pattern: smaller, lighter, uppercase, and bold. I'm going to reduce the spacing on this button because that seems to be a bit too much right now. And then one thing I'm going to do is make the button into a color that actually looks good with the blue. So in theory, I could just steal this little blue color right here. But that doesn't really pop as much now, right? Like there's plenty of other blue stuff on the page. And this button to make a new appointment might be one of the most important buttons on the page. So I want it to be a little bit more easy to see. So one way to do that is, hold on one second. I'm actually just styling this button bolder, and in some ways it's now more similar to the label style. And I'll just remove the border here. And I'll make it a bit taller, which it feels like I could use that. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so I don't want to do this blue color. Instead, what I might do is pair the cool blue with a warmer accent color. And that's one of the things that I recommend in Learn UI Design. The very best color that you can pair with a cool color, like say blue or purple, is almost certainly going to be a warm color, like maybe something that's kind of like a golden, just like a yellowish, orangish, golden color. It's like a good thing to explore. So yeah, maybe something like that. And then a bunch of these pieces of text here did not seem to get selected. So I need to go select all of these. And again, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to change them to inter, regular, 16, left aligned. This should be much better. Yeah, now just for the sake of this example, I don't actually think we're going to get to this table below. So I'm going to go ahead and delete it. We'll have more than enough to cover just with this stuff. But in a real design, obviously, we wouldn't be able to get away with that. One thing I'll do here is I'll bold the doctor's name because I feel like that's one of the more important parts of the appointment. Is you've got the date, the time, and then you want to be able to see who you're actually seeing. And I'll move this down a bit too. Now I made the backgrounds of these cards white here, but I'm actually going to go and select all the cards themselves. And right now they have a very wide border radius. Like you'll notice it's actually, if I select this, it says it has a 20 pixel border radius. And what I want to do is actually have a much smaller border radius. The wider your border radius is, the more it just feels like you kind of have a soft, friendly vibe going on. Whereas if you had, say, if I had no border radius at all, that means it's perfectly square. And so if all these cards are perfectly square, that feels like kind of official and succinct and tight. But I want just the slightest hint of friendliness. So I'm going to do 2 pixels. And it looks like I need to remove a border there and here. Nice. That's better. And then looks like I also have some borders right here. I'm going to increase the brightness of them. And then I'm going to see if I can apply them on these 2 cards. Yeah, they're... Oh, this is a bit wonky. 1 second. Because this is someone else's file, there's just like something is happening. Oh, yeah, there we go. The layers are just not acting exactly how I expect them to because of how we set up the file. But this idea that everything has like a little 2 pixel border radius and that's it, I can apply that to everything. Like I can apply that to the buttons. I applied it to the cards. And again, my goal is just to be consistent about as much stuff as possible, like to have everything default to consistency and only be inconsistent if it's truly different. So to those ends, I'm also going to take this content up here and I'm going to put that same style card behind everything, just like, this right here. Now in an actual design, I would be positioning these a little bit more closely. Maybe I'd make sure they were spaced exactly evenly, but for the purposes of today, this is good enough. Get some stuff out there. Now I'll pull in the spacing here so that there's a very clear divide between the appointments on the left-hand side and the prescriptions on the right-hand side. What I don't want is for these cards to be so long that a user somehow sees the first prescription as being related to the first appointment. Like that's not true. That's sort of a false parallelism. And so I just want to make sure there's enough spacing so that they are perceived as 2 separate lists. And likewise, just as I highlighted the doctor's name, I'm also going to make sure that the name of the medication is highlighted as well. Looks like these are a bit wonky. Yeah, so I'll grab all of these, line them left. And then I'll bold these, bring them down just a bit. And this can be centered within the card. Cool. All right. And now, again, just for the sake of consistency, one other thing I might do is just as these cards all have sort of a subtle border around them, I might add in a stroke on the outside of this button. But rather than having the black be 100% opacity, I might give it something like a 10% opacity so that it blends in with the yellow behind it. And it's just one of those other things where now the card and the button, all the cards and all the buttons on the whole page are consistent, not only in the border radius, but in the border style. So at this point, now we can do like a little bit more detailed of a before and after. And we basically use just a few general principles here. and I break it up into two sections. One is sort of the fundamental stuff that we did just about simplifying the UI, saying what can we remove, what can we just delete wholesale, what can we really de-emphasize or lighten or reduce the importance of, and then what stuff can we hide behind a menu. In that latter category, by the way, that's good for things like this download PDF button. If very few users download a PDF and yet you still need the functionality, that might be the perfect sort of thing to put in a menu of like other actions or something like that. Of course, we didn't get here in this like very brief redesign, but that's just an example. Anyhow, so we asked ourselves those three questions, and then the other half of the stuff we focused on was really about brand, and in particular typography. And we switched from Open Sans, which is it's what's called a humanist font, and it has like a lot of little details that are sort of reminiscent of human handwriting. Even though it looks like a computer font, like it's ultimately its base is in human handwriting. And we actually switched to a different font that in many ways is a little more crisp and neat and clean feeling, which seems like applicable for this medical application. Actually, just one quick example of that is if you look at a character like the E or the C, you'll notice the terminals, that's the end of the letter forms right here, are parallel with each other. It's a small detail, but it kind of makes the font feel a little bit more crisp and put together to have that parallel, those parallel lines even within a letter form like that. If we go and look at the original font, Open Sans, you'll see that there's no sense of parallelism. It's literally open, right? Because these terminals don't come in and form parallel lines. There's just a lot more open space right here. So we didn't want something that was quite as open and friendly feeling. We wanted something that felt a little bit more crisp and professional. And I would say that this works perfectly for this sort of application. And then another big thing to consider with brand is color, and then and imagery is another one. But with the color, I mean, we talked briefly about having an accent that's warm to complement the brand color, which is cool. And then with the imagery, there's almost none on this page. But one thing I would think about if we had more time is perhaps, these are circular, and we took these very round cards and made them much more squared off. I would do the same thing with these images right here. But that would all be if we had more time. Instead, I want to leave a few minutes for questions at the end. And this can be questions on anything. Certainly this design in general, or if you've seen either of the design courses that I offer, you can ask about those as well.
Awesome, Eric. Thank you so much. I'm so happy that design is trending much more in this direction with UI, because I feel like there was a period where it was just all the information in one place, no kind of like structure or class to it. So it's really nice to see the process of clearing that through and how you make those decisions. I appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
For everyone watching, like Eric said, we are going to have an actual Q&A period. So if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. I did want to take a second here to formally ask you a little more about your course. The course offer that's there today is for UI design specifically.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you can talk a little more about what that course is covering, what it's offering, if there's kind of like a beginning and an end point that students can expect to be at by the end of that course.
Yeah, absolutely. So Learn UI Design is about getting you to the point where even if you've never designed anything, you can confidently design websites, web apps, and mobile apps. Just any sort of visual design for screens is the way I say it. And so this covers all the things that are like a little bit more purely visual. Typography, color, layout, spacing, alignment, all of these sorts of things are covered in the course. And a lot, like basically the majority of what we talked about today, that's stuff that is in Learn UI Design. So like I said, it is aimed, basically my litmus test for this was, what is the stuff that I want to see? Like, what would I have killed to know when I was a beginning designer? Because I found it very hard to get good design advice. Not having gone to art school and being like pretty self-taught in design, I was like really sensitive to the idea that I wanted to find the things where if I used these ideas, it would make my bad designs look better. And so that was my litmus test for what goes into Learn UI Design. It's like, what did I want to know as a beginning designer, and what could have made bad designs look better? Because so much of the design curriculum that you see out there, and this is still true, although it is getting better, is just stuff that's like largely impractical. Things like baseline grids, or even using grids in general, They can be handy, but they almost raise more questions than they answer. And so what I wanted to do is really just offer a set of practical strategies for design. And so Learn UI Design is it's a pre-recorded video course. There's currently 30 hours of content.
Wow.
All students have lifetime access, so you don't have to go through it in any rush. And I still get emails all the time. In fact, if I go and look at who's logged in most recently, it's going to be almost equally split between people who've joined within the last couple months, people who've joined, say, last year, people who joined 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and so on. So this is really like something that's a lifetime resource for folks, and you can just keep going back to again and again. And then, you know, Jonah, you asked, like, where does it leave you? Well, it's going to leave you a much better designer. There is a track to create a portfolio using the course, but I've arranged all the stuff in the course by topic rather than sort of the chronological design process. And there's a very specific reason behind that. I realize this is not the most common choice in design courses, but I made this for very specific reasons, and I can go into those if anyone is curious. But yes, this will leave you with all the skills to either bring to a work project, a personal project, an entrepreneurial project, or just creating your own portfolio to get hired as a designer. Everything that you would need to know to do visual design professionally is covered in there.
It sounds like it's a very good mix, too, of like philosophy and practical application as well, and not just leaving you with like a step-by-step system, but actually how to think in a better way about design.
Yeah. Yeah, there's not a lot that I would label just as philosophy per se, but
Sure.
One thing that I hear from students again and again is they almost learn by osmosis. Most of the lessons are structured like this video, where I will create an example that highlights everything that I want to say in a specific lesson. So like, for instance, in the alignment lesson, I have, it's actually a dashboard not too different from this in many ways. Where there's like sidebar on the left, there's some table, well, it's not a table, but there's some information in the middle. And then everything looks fine on that dashboard, but all the alignment is really wonky. And so I then go and talk about all these little use cases of what a designer needs to know about aligning stuff. How do you align things so that they look centered? When do you do it mathematically versus by eye? How do you align text of different sizes, and so on? And then likewise, the homework assignments that go with the course are also skill-based, where I might give you a file where it's a perfectly good design, except everything is unaligned, and then you fix that, or so on, just, you know, for whatever that lesson is. But yeah, I hear a lot of students go through the course and then they say, you know, because you've essentially stood over my shoulder as I've just done 30 hours of design projects and I'm just narrating my thought process and my rationale the entire time. Yeah, you learn an enormous amount about like, what's the reason why we're doing one thing versus another, or what are some of the go-to options I have here, just because you've seen me do so many projects on screen by the end of this course.
That's awesome. Getting a question in here, their comment on grids spurred a question from Michael here. Do you not use grids and columns as much in your projects as you progress in your design skills?
Yes. So first of all, welcome, Michael. I'm glad you could make it. This is actually Michael's submission, and we were just talking about it.
Oh, awesome. Yeah.
So do I not use grids and columns as much in my projects as you progress in your design skills? So this is somewhat, well, actually, let me first link to a blog post I've written on this that will be able to, oh shoot, I need to sign in to actually go to the chat. You know what? Let's see. How can I, yeah, you know what? Just a second. Sorry about this.
Yeah.
No, I'm going to send you the link and then you can post it.
Absolutely.
Cool. There we go. So this is a blog post about why designers don't need grids, type scales, and color theory, and some of the other things that you hear a lot about. It's not that there's no place for grids, but they become much less useful the moment you consider that almost any design you do these days needs to be responsive, and it needs to, if the screen gets 2 pixels bigger, you have a very context-sensitive question, which is what element gets 2 pixels bigger if the screen gets 2 pixels bigger? Is it 2 sidebars that each get 1 pixel bigger, or is it the main content that gets 2 pixels bigger? Like, what happens if there's, you know, the sidebar on the left like we had? What should happen to that? And so there's just so many questions that at some point, like, grids are fantastic if the design you're creating never changes size. They will and one of the reasons they're fantastic is because they default you to aligning everything. And that's an extremely important skill. But if you can align everything and just know that that's important to do, even if it's not using a true 12 column grid, for instance, then you actually don't, grids are far less important than many designers would make them out to be. It's one of those things that we talk a lot about because it's been taught in design schools for like, I think centuries, but in this day and age, it's less important for stuff on the web or on mobile. And in the course, I do talk about if grids aren't so important, what is? And the answer is, in short, alignment, but there's much more to it than that.
So just to satisfy my ignorance a little bit, we're talking more about like relative alignment versus to a background grid.
Yeah, that's a great way to say it.
Okay, yeah. Cool. Very cool. Well, we are sadly coming up on time here, Erik, but I want to thank you so much for your time and just restate there for everyone watching. The course link for the UI design is in the description of the YouTube video. It'll be emailed to you and it is in the comments there. And I did just want to call out as well, you had mentioned before we started the event, you also have a UX course as well. Mm-hmm. Would you just call out quickly what that's tackling or if it's similarly structured?
Yes, it's very similarly structured in almost every way. The main difference is the UI course covers things that are really fall under the umbrella of visual design. The UX course covers things that fall under the umbrella of more usability. So user research, usability testing, wireframing, sort of some of the stuff that happens earlier in the design process. And it's much more about making apps that feel intuitive to users. Like it's almost more like psychology than art. So, yep. That's Learn UX Design. And you know what? I will, again, Jonah, just send you 2 links here. If you're wondering which course is the best, I have 2 articles. One is called 7 Rules for Creating Gorgeous UI. And the second is called 4 Rules for Intuitive UX. And so if you read each of these articles, each of them presents you with a bunch of different strategies. But the first course, the 7 Rules for UI, if those are more interesting and useful and the sorts of things that you want to be working on and getting better at, check out the UI course. And if the latter article, the 4 Rules for Intuitive UX, if those seem more interesting and useful, check out the UX course first.
Awesome. So you would recommend reading these articles before deciding which course is kind of a good fit for you?
Yeah, if you're stuck between the 2 and you're not sure which one is a better fit, if you already know, great, you don't need to read them. But I mean, they're good articles.
Right.
Them, so whatever.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, man. And to everyone watching, please hop in the comments. Thank Erik for his time. I know I enjoyed watching a designer's mind actually work as he's making these choices. It's cool to see versus just seeing the end product. If you like videos like this or information like this, please like and subscribe to the Discover YouTube. We love to bring creators like Erik out here to teach us new things and expand our knowledge. Erik, I did want to ask one more question. Do you have any last kind of parting words or bits of advice for people beginning their UI UX journey as far as just like how you can start right away in being a better designer?
That's a good question. One of the things, and this is actually a theme around, like both of the courses are sort of built around this theme, but I really come from a more analytical background. I thought initially that I was going to be a programmer and actually did a couple internships before switching over to PM and then eventually switching over to freelance design. And so one thing that I've found that's really worked for me, because I don't feel like much of an art school type. I don't feel like an artsy person per se, despite the fact that I live in a jungle office. Is just try and bring the power of analysis to design. And if you are working on a design and you notice that it's not working, see if you can like specifically say what it is that feels like it's not working. Or even better yet, find a design that actually feels better, where they've solved that problem that you're trying to solve or you're failing to solve, and say, why does that work? See if you can like articulate it in words, because to the degree that you're able to describe what works and when, you'll be able to transfer that same solution to your own design. So that's something that, like, I mean, I still do this, and it's like an ongoing process, but it's amazing how much headway you can make very quickly and very soon if you take your own designs and you go, I'm going to be specific about what's not working here, and I'm going to go find examples that do solve those problems, and I'm going to state in words why. So yeah, that's maybe my first recommendation.
I feel like that's good advice for life in general. Be able to diagnose the problem before trying to fix it. That's really awesome. Well, yeah. Once again, thank you so much, Erik. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Just to repeat, all of this will be emailed to you with a replay and the course link. Erik, have a wonderful day, and we appreciate. Hope we see you soon again.
Thanks. You too. Yeah, and thank you for having me on.
Of course. Have a good one, everybody.
Bye, everyone.